Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on our beautiful planet. Today we have an interesting webinar because I met Robert last fall, I think. And then in one conversation, I found out he has all these initiatives to address people who are houseless in California. And then in our next conversation, we discovered that he was a realtor for a while and he did these initiatives. And then I read his book that he wrote. And then it's one of these people who has developed a huge capacity within himself because of a varied life. And this always interests me when we just don't go down one rabbit hole, but we glean wisdom from different aspects of a multifaceted life. And Robert is one of those dudes. And so before I go any further, as we have everybody right now, as usual, I'm going to read our community agreements for these webinars. So these community webinars are here to support our members and friends and the mission of the ASI. We ask participants to stay connected, accountable, sensitive, and skillful when engaging at this webinar. We ask that you agree to create and maintain safe space for learning and growth. To that end, we will refrain from marketing or self-aggrandizing while avoiding inflammatory or deliberately destructive comments. If you want to recommend a relevant and appropriate resource to attendees, please do so in the chat box. The ASI will remove participants who engage in harmful activity after one warning. Thank you so much for creating this community with us, for showing up with presence, attunement, and skillful awareness. And so, without further ado, Robert is a teacher, a counselor, author, and humanitarian who has developed a unique approach to communication, contemplation, and inquiry. He promotes national and international conversations on healing. He has been a featured speaker at the UN and has contributed to global documentaries. Robert is the host of Awareness That Heals podcast, which asks, might I add, provocative questions about spirituality. And he hosts a live webinar, which is free. His website and those details we will give you at the end of the webinar. But for now, I hand you over to our presenter today, Robert.
Well, thank you very much, Jack, and to all of you for joining us. It's really an honor, and it's something that has been extremely dear to my heart for 55 years. At 18, I started my first spiritual approaches, which in some cases was more like profound spirituality, and in some cases was more like a spiritual circus. So I've been around a lot of blocks, and I've had a lot of conversations about these very themes with a lot of spiritual teachers during that over a half a decade. And today, I think we're going to be really looking at what is the importance of bringing our emotional intelligence to our students, to ourselves, and bringing that into how we interact with them, and not simply our spiritual teachings. And from what I understand, a good portion of you are doing different types of spiritual teaching. And so I'm going to do my best to address the varieties of approaches. So, for example, some people might have a congregation, some people might be a yoga teacher, some people might be dealing with people one-on-one. And in every situation, the amount that we bring our authentic experience to help those that we're working with would differ. So I'm going to do my best to try to relate to that so that you all feel related to. So please be patient as I'm talking, because it might sound at first that I'm only talking at one level, but I'm going to do my very best to talk at multiple levels. What does emotional intelligence really mean to me, to you? And this is something, and I would say to you as I'm talking, please jot down a note, because we're going to, as I know you always have, a period of time to speak at the end, questions or just comments that you want to make. And I'm really eager to hear and meet you all. So jot down a note as we go along. So emotional intelligence to me means that we really are aware of what our inner experience is. And it involves being aware of what we feel and what we think. And that might sound very obvious, but in my experience, being both a psychotherapist for over 50 years and a teacher, being aware of one's feelings and especially one's needs is an actually rare commodity, even for psychotherapists and oftentimes for teachers as well. So when I even use a word like needs, I had a big debate when I wrote my book, which only took me 40 years to write. Do I use the word essential needs? Do I use the word elements of compassion? What do I use to try to convey to my audience what it takes if you're feeling afraid, if actually you need to develop ways to be courageous or to find safety? Is that a need? Is that a quality? Is that an element of compassion? The answer for me is it's all of the above. And it probably took me 5 years to try to figure out, who am I talking to? Not only am I talking to a spiritual audience, but am I talking to a psychological audience? Am I talking to students? Am I talking to teachers? Am I trying to talk to everybody? And I think in the end, I didn't figure it out. I think it ended up being a mishmash of mostly really teachers and therapists in the end, and not to people that were relative beginners. So I would like to ask you, Jack, if you don't mind, to put up a list of the introspective guides. It's one of the tools that I've used for the last several decades, which identifies 75 challenging emotions that we as human beings go through and 75 elements of compassion or essential needs. And when you put it together, if you're in a state of grief, for example, how can you support yourself towards soothing? If you're anxious, how do you help yourself relax? Now, that may seem intuitively obvious to you, but as a starting point, many people thought I was reading their mind when I was saying, gee, it sounds like you need so-and-so. And it's something that, of course, is just the beginning point. It's not the answer, but it's a very, very important beginning point to give people hope that they can identify their feelings and they can have a direction they can move. And that direction is not only for our students, it's for ourselves as well. So we're going to be giving a smaller sample of just the challenging emotions later for a poll, but you may want to reflect back to this larger poll if indeed some of the more challenging emotions are ones that you most identify that are with you in your life, that you could potentially identify with your students and let them know how you work on that in your teaching. Now, to some of you, this will not be appropriate. And to some of you, it will be appropriate 1/4 of the time or 1/3 of the time. For example, it's going to matter a lot if you're addressing a group or whether you're addressing an individual. If you're addressing a group, you'll always have to be concerned that you may have a student in there that is quite young emotionally. And so they need to idealize you because they're young in spirit, and they really need the inspiration to look up to somebody that they didn't maybe have a good father image. However, if you're with a student that's quite developed, they're really going to want a more mutual adult relationship, and it can be immensely helpful for you to say, you know, I've gone through this too, and this is some of the ways that I handled it, and have that be part of your dialogue. It's very, very important that as you look at these lists, that you're not just looking at them intellectually, and that you're looking at the list and seeing personally, and maybe in your own mind, you just circle well, which ones of these are the emotions that I most commonly visit? And does that make sense to you that if you just take it in intellectually, it's really not going to apply to you. But if you really look at it, it's going to help you see further into what we're going to be going into of where could I share with people where I've used my teachings, and that's helped me deal with fear or anxiety or loss or aloneness. Now, I'm going to give you a sense of a bit of me and some of my human side so you can see I'm not just talking about these points, that I'm a human being. You know, when I started off as a therapist for the first 45 years, I was pretty content to move everywhere from a schizophrenic population starting at 22, which ages me 53 years ago, to teenagers, to largely very, very successful people who realize that they're empty. And I was quite content to be in a four-walled room with small groups and individual sessions. But then with the world falling apart and realizing that our country's in danger, it really shot me into a different gear. And 25 years ago, I started a foundation called the Global Bridge Foundation, and I realized that I was going to be capable of doing more if I was really addressing issues like poverty and homelessness, regenerative agriculture, global warming, et cetera. So that's what our foundation is doing, along with working with the psychological aspects with a variety of foundation leaders and helping them with their own staff. Personally, I started off when I was talking publicly where I was a bit performance phobic. You know, I was used to just having control and being in a little box. It was quite easy. But when I first started, it was really unnatural for me to really speak. And on top of that, I had a kidney transplant 25 years ago. And my reaction to the kidney transplant medications was like I was mainlining speed. So I slept for an hour a night for 10 years. I'm sorry, I slept for an hour a night for 6 months, and I had a sleeping problem for 10 years. And so I was really not capable of feeling any good feelings at all. And so I had to rely on a certain amount of wisdom, a certain amount of will, a certain amount of intention finding inside myself to be a counselor. And it really demonstrates one of the central principles of what we're talking about today. Half of my clients I knew so well that they insisted on a mutual relationship. So I would share with them oftentimes what state I was in for the first 2 or 3 minutes because they were really wanting it to be mutual. And I also didn't want them to identify if I was empty or exhausted. I didn't want them to think it was them. The relationship between a teacher and a student, or a therapist and a client, there's a telepathic thing that goes on. And so the other half had no idea that I even had a kidney transplant. So there was a lot of discernment, which is a key element in the question of who do we share our personal experience with, and how do we decide when it's going to really make sense to do that. So I'm asking you to think about that with me as I'm speaking. So I've made a list of elements that are really crucial to consider if you're going to share in a group or you're going to share individually. You're going to want to take a look at these issues. What's the length of time that you've actually known this person? So there may not be a closet. You may have been with them for a year, but you may have no idea that they had a trauma in their childhood. You want to be very careful that you know them well enough that you have a broad sense of their history. The level of trust that you've developed with them. The level of seeing that they've gone through healing processes in their life. So you have confidence in their ability to deal with challenging emotions. The level of trust you have in yourself and your ability to share clearly is also a crucial element. And all of these need to be looked at carefully. If you're going in a group, the percentage of people that have gone through a parallel kind of suffering that you're considering sharing yourself. The maturity of the students. Are you dealing with a relatively beginning, middle, or advanced group? Prior conversations that you've had with people individually, and your ability to discriminate, because many teachers and even therapists are not easily able to discriminate who can handle me sharing parts of my experience that they are going to identify with. And so if I show them that, you know what, I've been through fear too, and these are some of the ways that I deal with it according to my teachings, that can be the biggest breakthrough. And in my experience, half the time at least, it's the biggest breakthroughs that happen when you have a mutual relationship and you really zero in on only sharing the things that the students can identify with. It's a very, very key point. If you see that in a group that there's one or more people that are really extremely young emotionally, and they're let's say looking for idealization, and they're really much more in an infantile state than they are in an adult state, then you're not going to want to share, because they're going to need you to be holding the together image. So all of these are facets that you're going to want to screen in sharing. But when you have a mature audience or a mature congregation or mature students, individually or in some, especially small groups, larger groups are a little bit more shaky. It's just immensely beneficial to show the emotional intelligence of, I have this experience too. I can see that you may be able to identify with this. I can see that you may be able to identify with some of the processes I've gone through, whether it's meditation or whether it's identifying qualities that you need to display in your attitude, your tone of voice, the way you care for them, your empathy, certain actions that you take, etc. And also asking your students if they want you to share your experience. That's also a very good thing to be able to ask. Now, my view is that a big hole in humanity itself is that we haven't learned how to share fear and anger in all of our leadership groups. That includes spiritual teachers, it includes therapists, it includes politicians, it includes teachers, it includes parents. Nobody's has a model, almost nobody has a model for how do you deal with your emotional state and actually help yourself. So people are left to try to figure that out on themselves. Now, some therapists, of course, do it. Some of you do it, of course. But the degree to which it's done is very minimal in our society. If you look at the black and white pictures of presenting a persona, I think you'll agree with me that if you're watching a TV commentator or you're watching a politician or you're at a temple or a church or a synagogue, you're generally going to see somebody that looks compassionate or mindful or aware or sensitive. And they're not going to go into their personal issue, even when they can potentially help the congregation. Now, I've had probably 50 experiences with quite well-known teachers through the last 50 years, and I am convinced that they could have helped their students immensely. And I'm going to just give you a few examples without names of some quite prominent teachers. There was one prominent teacher that I've met several times through the years who has a very severe body image issue. And he is, let's say, 100 pounds more weight than he would have liked, for sure, that any of us would have liked. And never in their career, and this is a long career, have they ever talked about it. Is it a glandular issue? Is it an eating issue? How do they come to peace? How much help do you think they could have given if they would have exposed their own inner process of what they went through? Another teacher had severe anxiety about passing on a tradition to nuns and to people that were in the mountains in another country, and they were in a state of anxiety, sleepless. How much value would it have been if this teacher would have talked about their anxiety and how they were working with it, and how meditation was helping that? Another teacher, I went to a small retreat, and one of the students asked, "What do you think about groovy love?" And I'm thinking to myself, what? What is groovy love? I don't even know what groovy love is. And they went on for 45 minutes about groovy love. And it was like, did I go to another planet somehow? Where am I? And I found out later, and to my surprise, I ended up not intentionally leaving this woman in tears, saying, what were you talking about? And she kind of just talked around it. And I found out later, which will be one of the issues I'm going to bring up later, that this person was one of the big donors to Spirit Rock. And she was appeasing her. And one of the issues that's not talked about by spiritual teachers, and I think it would make Jesus and Buddha roll over in their, well, maybe not graves, wherever they are, roll over, fly off, whatever they're going to do. It would make them nuts to think that the primary issue of money in our culture is so avoided. What about you as teachers and the issues you've gone through? And how could you not share some level of that if you had mature enough students to see that you have ambivalence? I had another teacher that said, I wish I could live in the same neighborhood as my students, but I can't. I have to drive 30 miles to live where my students are because they're wealthier and they're using dana. And so they're left poor. Now, is that a sensible way to deal with money? Does that lead to questions? Does that lead to a revelation? Should spiritual people automatically be poor? Is that not a matter of not caring for themselves? And more importantly, their emotional authenticity may bring up the students' emotional authenticity about what they're going through in money. So that becomes a very, very important thing. Jack, would you initiate the first poll that we have? And as Jack is initiating this poll, even though it's a yes/no poll, see here. Yeah. Even though it's a yes/no question, I would say it would be worthwhile in your own mind to think of it more in a percentile way, because I think most of us would agree under the right circumstances, it's appropriate to share a little. But maybe you'll be 5% or maybe you'll be 95%, that if the opportunity is there, you really want to share, as much as you can that would benefit your students. Now, I happen to be a very careful advocate of sharing when it's appropriate. So, Jack, maybe you can give us a sense as the poll comes in as to what people's answers are on a yes/no basis. But in your own inner mind, please take it as a relative question.
So the answers are still coming in.
Okay. Okay.
72, 78% have replied.
Okay.
I'll wait until it's like 81% replied.
Okay. Okay. So from my vantage point, this is one of the questions of our ages. Our country, our world is in a survival mode. Who is going to model it? To me, war is caused largely, amongst other issues, by suppressed fear and anger. If we have no models that do it, we can't talk about You know, I'm a little afraid you're going to take over this land here. Well, I'm a little afraid you're going to take over this land here. Well, we can't resolve it. We can't talk about it. So I guess we're going to have to fight over it. And that's oversimplistic, but in another way, it's not. It is definitely partially causative, that we haven't learned how to model and to be able to, as leaders, and I'm not specifically talking only about spiritual teachers here, but we haven't really, as mankind, been able to, even many times with our closest friends, been able to talk about those 75 emotions. And that list is not the golden guide to a list. It's just one list. Or where do we steer when we are in that place? How are we doing, Jack?
So Robert, I've just published the results. Can you guys see the results? Yeah, great, thank you.
Okay, maybe you can read them to me because I'm not sure I can.
So of the first question, which was addressed to people who are spiritual leaders, do you believe that the best way to support your student followers is to present yourself as having it all together?
Yes.
4% yes. 96% no.
Great.
4% yes.
Great.
96.
Okay.
And the yes came in very late. It was like, no, I don't believe it. And then after some time, which is interesting as well, because that's about our emotional state. You know, is it safe for me to actually be brutally honest here or radically honest, you know?
Right.
The second question addressed to non-leaders, do you want or need your leaders to appear like they have it all together? And 13% said yes. 88% said no.
30 and 88?
13
okay.
said yes, I want them to appear they have it all together.
Okay, great.
And 88 said no.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So yeah, so we have a relatively communicative group of spiritual teachers. I can only tell you that the percentage of teachers that I talked with through the years, who granted were mostly Buddhist teachers, they had larger congregations. I would have 30 or 40 stories to share that I would say 75% said no. And it wasn't an absolute no, but it was a virtually absolute no. So I believe that you all have a message to share with fellow teachers of the importance of being able to share in a timely, contemplative way, where it's not just, I'm going to blurt out in a self-absorbed sort of vomit. It's more, I believe if I share this particular detail, it's really going to help you through where you are. So there were a number of questions that Jack and I came up with that I'd like to address. And the first one was, as spiritual leaders, do we foster the persona that does not represent who we really are and who we really are and how we live? Now, this is
Robert, would you like to invite people to speak with you at this point? Do you want people to do a hands up? Yes.
I would love to hear anybody that has any either commentary, questions, disagreements, agreements. Everybody's welcome. Frankly, all the time I'm talking, other than mid-sentence, I would invite anybody.
Maybe let's do a hand up, wherever the hand up thing is. Does somebody know where the hand up thing is? Okay, Jenny has found it, and here she is.
Great.
Jenny, hi.
Hi, Jack, and hi, Robert. Great to be here. There's a teaching, and there's stories of the Bible and fables that point to something deeper than what maybe the ins and outs and changeable aspects of a story are. And in that, something is lost when the same stories are told over and over again by teachers just echoing a previous teacher's story they've told. And secondly, it loses that live dynamic aspect of, this is what it's looking like now. And you'll hear teachers telling the same story over and over, that one time that they had a revelation, blah, 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 you know, one healing thing. So this is a beautiful, and as we see in the polls, people are hungry for authenticity. What does it look like now? And that, of course, is the only place life is. So thanks for
Exactly.
bringing this to the forefront.
And thank you for that. I mean, to me, one of the techniques that I've used since I was in college, because I realized that I was a little bit off the beaten track, was something I call understating. If you're afraid at first, you can still share where you are in an understated way, not to scare people. But basically, the alive spirit is going to be where you are. What your head tells them, maybe we can convey 10% of value from my vantage point. 90% is going to be, it doesn't mean we can't share the teachings that we have and that it's not valuable. But if you're going to create a personal transformation, there's nothing like a spirit-to-spirit communion of, yeah, I either am there or I have been there. I'm still partially there. So yeah, thank you very much for that. And actually, I would welcome you sending that, to me. I mean, I'd like to be acquainted with it. That would be great. So second question was, are there any other questions?
Yes, Catherine.
Hi. Hi. Just a clarity in the words you're using. Do leaders or non-leaders appear? The word in appearing to me is, we all can appear like we get it together. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think we can instill confidence in having people wanting to chat with you or discuss things with you because you appear like you got it together. And then in speaking about them and in speaking with them, you gradually let them know that, you don't. You're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and the best day you're having and everything that you know up until that moment. So I was just cautious about the word appearance, and I'm
Right.
wondering if there's anything wrong with thinking that you appear,
Yeah.
that you got it all together.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that point. I hope I don't appear that I have deep personal problems. I'm speaking about, you may 98% appear like you have it all together, and or that you're at peace, or that you're sensitive, you're warm. The issue isn't that. The issue is there an exception? Are there some exceptions? I think if we don't generally appear that we are fulfilled, that we're inspired, or that we're at peace, or that we trust life, or we're grateful, if we don't appear that way to a large extent, then of course we need to model that. The issue is really more, I'm a percentage guy. It might be that we appear that way 95%, but if 5% of the time we're sharing something personal, that would be that way. So I was in no way suggesting that we should appear differently as a general rule. So thank you for clarifying that. I may not have, it's hard to articulate every single thing exactly accurately. So it's very helpful to have the questions to bring that out. Thank you.
DK? Just to unmute yourself there. Great.
I have a lot of thoughts and feelings and sensations going on right now with this conversation. And personally, I have, in my own spiritual life, I have run into spiritual teachers who appear to be one way and turns out they are behaving in ways that are unethical in the background. So I've run into that in Catholicism and Buddhism. And so I am personally a little suspicious when spiritual teachers act like they have it all together. And I don't mean that spiritual teachers should be sharing constantly about themselves, but this is a red flag for me. And I'm an Enneagram teacher and guide, and my teacher, David Daniels, would say, put the teachings on the pedestal, not the teacher. And he also talked about teaching the Enneagram in a democratic way, in that we are each other's teachers and students. And so that's what I'm thinking.
Yes, I think there's, you know, when I referred to the spiritual circus earlier on, I've had much more than my share, probably because of the frequency of interest, of teachers that appear one way and are another way. And so I do think it's quite crucial to put the teachings first, and when appropriate, with the conditions that are carefully looked at, that you're taking care of your student, identifying with them as is appropriate, so that they can gain the benefit of how you apply the teachings. So if you suffered from insecurity and you have the Enneagram and you're able to show how you use the Enneagram to work with the tendencies that were there, that's gold. So I'm someone that does not believe in sudden trust. I don't believe in love at first sight either. I believe in strong physical attraction at first sight, but I'm someone that really believes that it's going to take a while before you're going to. I like to think of myself that I try to limit myself to 1,000 questions when I'm with somebody or I'm meeting them, and I'm saying it somewhat facetiously, but people that know me well know it's not that much of an exaggeration. And I'm also open to receiving 1,000 questions. I love the inquiry and the asking back and forth. And I think that we're wise to hold meeting people in suspension and just being able to ask our questions and being able to not make snap judgments. So a second question is, to what extent do we conceal our authentic selves for the sake of a spiritual image? Now, this is a very subtle question, and going into my field, we have to ask that both consciously and subconsciously, because it's not just I don't think many of us would do it consciously, but we may be in a rip-roaring, horrible mood, and we are preserving our image. And there may be many times where that's the appropriate thing to do. But there may be some times where we might even be able to help ourselves at the same time as our students by saying, you know what, I just got news that my spouse has terminal cancer, and I'm dealing with these feelings right now. I'm opening it with you. I'm allowing the feelings to be there, and I'm just being transparent. So there are times where a spiritual image is appropriate, but I think it's important as an inquiry for us all to ask that question: when are we on automatic pilot? No matter how we feel, we're going to present ourselves the same. I think that is what we've been taught. One of the answers that I got from many of the spiritual teachers that I talked with about especially I dug a lot into the area of how could you as a Buddhist teacher not talk about money as a central area and reveal your own relationship to money? Because so many of the Buddhist teachers were in some degree of conflict about money. And again, Buddha would do whatever he would do wherever Buddha is, in thinking that, and watching some of the Jesus shows as well as just being two of the major teachers in our past, money was central. And so it's so important that we address the issues that are most present in our culture and are most affecting our world. So, I mean, so much of this, the reason why authenticity is important is not only for the individual healing, But the individual healing allows all of us to have the best chance to realize, you know, maybe I'm not just here for myself and my family. Maybe I'm also here for the world. Maybe I'm also here for the planet. Maybe I'm also here for peace. You know, maybe I'm also here for love and compassion. And if people are in a wound and they just are not able to get through that wound, then that will be basically until they die. So we have a chance as spiritual teachers to really create some major breakthroughs in being able to reveal where we are. One of the groups that I did many years ago, one of the students in the group he was a producer, a director, an actor, and he was saying, well, I had my normal meeting and I did my normal image management thing, blah 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 blah, and he was just kind of running it through, and I went, whoa 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 whoa, what do you mean by image management? What are you talking about? And he was saying, well, of course, I automatically want to present a certain image with whomever I'm with, and I'm on automatic pilot. That's what I do. Now, I believe unconsciously that as spiritual teachers, a fairly high percentage of us are on a version of automatic pilot. I believe that you as a group, with it 96% believing that carefully selected, it's going to be of value to reveal experiences and how your teachings have helped you, how it could help them. That's going to be amazingly helpful. And I'm a big believer in you help one person or two people or three people or a family. They help the family next to them. They help their grandchildren. The grandchildren help their friends. It spreads out. And there's never going to be a time where the stakes are higher for us as spiritual leaders to be not only an inspiration by being an inspiration, but also being an inspiration by not having to be an inspiration, but being able to also be dignifying what it means to be human.
Thank
So-
you, Robert. We've got
Yeah.
two hands up here on this
Thank you.
section.
Thank you.
Jerry?
Yeah, the thing that is really kind of sinking in as I'm listening to all of this wonderful exposition is there's a fundamental problem with the paradigm that the entire culture and pretty much all of the traditions and lineages have, and that is the idea that there's some finished product of a state that places the person in a position to be a spiritual teacher. We were talking about, do you present yourself as having it all together? And I'm thinking, well, now what exactly does it mean to have it all together? I know that there isn't an end state where everything in life is perfect for anyone. You can, the Dalai Lama talks about how, he has moods and he experiences anger and all of this. So we have this impossible ideal that if I'm going to be a spiritual teacher, then I must have some level of attainment. And if I have that attainment, then I must have everything together. But what really does it look like to have it all together? What it means, I think, is that you completely accept yourself exactly the way you are, right? And to be a spiritual teacher, Brahman accepts everything, okay, and rejects nothing. And there's nothing defective in the fact that we have emotions, we have psychology, we have to work through things, we have trauma that we're still working on, we have shadow that we still haven't surfaced and figured out how to address. So having it all together, in my view, would mean having kind of a handle on all that. Okay, here, this is coming up. Oh my goodness, this is from early childhood, and I had no idea that was lurking way down there. And okay, let's go to work on it. And what do I need? And I think teaching by example where we allow people to see that we're human and see, well, I'm grappling with something right now, and I'll share a little of it with you, and I'll tell you where I am. And, you know, I'm having some really terrible days, and I have a few good days, and I'm talking to somebody who's got a lot of insight into that. Let them see it.
All I can say is I love what you're saying. I mean, that to me is an authentic teacher. That is a way of authentically teaching. I think not every teacher has the skill to discern which students are so undeveloped that they can't afford to hear certain parts of us. But putting that to the side for the moment, even though I never will, you know, in live life, I agree with you completely. That the idea, when I referred to the spiritual circus, it was a load of people especially in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, where people appeared like they had it all together, and their words, it wasn't just an appearance, their words were supporting that. They were enlightened flat out. And enlightened didn't mean what you said. Enlightened meant the Buddhist sense of enlightenment. I'm awake. I don't have an ego anymore. I don't have anything to work on. I'm a finished product. And to me, I often think, knowing very deeply that I'm not enlightened, that if I was enlightened, that I would be reflecting on all the times that I wasn't for humanity. The idea of creating that kind of a duality between I have it together and you're aspiring to be like me. And the goal is not to be human anymore. Now, one of the things that I frequently say is, if you have wounds from childhood that are very, very deep, very likely expect to die with them. Wherever we are is not a problem. How we respond to where we are, that's the second arrow in Buddhism. You know, that's what really matters, is to be able to be the response to where we are, more so than where we are. If we're wounded, we're wounded. Now, how are we going to respond in a way that we're going to care for our wound, or are we not going to respond in a way? So I totally appreciate what you're saying.
Annie?
Oh, hi. Hi, Robert. Thank you so
Hello.
much. Yeah, I really am appreciating what you're saying, what you just said. You know, in the model out of India, oftentimes the teacher is deified and beyond beyond reproach. And that does disempower the student automatically. It's sort of like, well, I'll never get there. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. And also your point about the need for authenticity. I do feel in our culture, we're almost phobic about addressing how we're feeling. There are quick answers to, well, just let go, or just this, or just that. And oftentimes it's not quite that easy. And people are very hungry for authenticity. If a person in great power admits to, having to let go or relinquish power, it really does seem to inspire people. That's why the greats, bring out our better angels, which you're talking about. One thing I wanted to bring up, which came up early on, I teach yoga, and I remember hearing about another yoga teacher in my area, and she had a huge gripe about her yoga teacher. He had fallen from grace, so to speak, and she would carry on with her students about this. And it felt like a real burden for one particular student. So what I wanted to ask you about and address is that we have to have a degree of self-honesty, because we don't want to use our students as a means to unburden. There's a fine line. We want to be, yes, I'm human. I deal with sorrow. I deal with this. I deal with that. But there's a fine line, I feel, where you could use your platform to try to, you have an agenda, basically, that's not all that clean. So I just wanted to bring that up. That memory of that student speaking of her teacher came up, and I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you so much.
Say a little bit more. The student said, what about the teacher again? I didn't quite get it.
Well, the student said the teacher was carrying on about her previous teacher, who had fallen from grace, so to speak.
Right. Okay. Okay. I
Because
get it.
certain things had been revealed, and she would talk a lot about it, and
Yeah.
it kind of contaminated the situation for the student.
Yeah.
So there was somebody being almost not too authentic, because you can't be too authentic, but using her position to carry on.
Yes.
And it made for an unpleasant and not helpful situation.
Yeah. I mean, self-indulgence and carrying on about your own story when it's not crisply shared for the student or students is really, really a big miss. I tried to cover that in one of my points, but maybe not well enough. Maybe I need to, and thank you for helping me underscore it. This needs to be an art form, and it requires somebody that can discern the difference between self-aggrandizement, self-absorption, liking to tell stories about yourself, liking to look in the mirror. And it's so important that it be crisp, that it relate to the majority of people, that at least that are in any kind of a group, and that it really hopefully does not only have the story, but it has an inkling of where you can move from the story. And even that, the person can go on for 25 minutes. Generally speaking, when I'm talking about sharing, it's rarely more than 3 minutes. It's a very brief hit to say, I can identify here's the time period, it's now or it's then, and here are the words that help soothe me. Here are the actions I took. Here are the doctors I went to. You know, I laid down, I exercised. Whatever are the strategies that really were helpful. And then there's a back and forth of questions. You know, is that relating to you? And that's a very, very important part of it, is a series of questions so you can get a feel very quickly whether or not you're just going on and on.
Right.
So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And Rick?
Hi, I missed the first half hour, so forgive me and cut me short if I say something that implies ignorance of something you've already discussed. But anyway, I interviewed a woman the other day who's a professional psychiatrist, and she was a student of a spiritual teacher who claimed that he was the most highly evolved being on the planet. He was an avatar, and he had apparently an uncanny ability to recognize when a large inheritance from one of his students contained a Suric energy, and he was all too happy to have it bequeathed to him so he could purify it and thus save the student from their karma. Anyway, we got on to talk, since she's a psychiatrist, she knows her stuff, and we got on to talking about how common narcissism seems to be in spiritual teachers. And I remember Jack saying something about this too, that somebody or other claimed that a fairly high percentage of spiritual teachers seem to be narcissistic, like the profession attracts them. And I asked her, do you think he really believed all that stuff? Or was he just making it up to rake in money or, you know, impress his students? She said, yeah, he generally seemed to believe that stuff. So it's kind of interesting that one can become so self-deluded could you imagine yourself claiming to be the most enlightened person on the planet or the avatar of the age or something like that? Where would your head have to be at to make such claims? So anyway, I'll just leave that as a statement, I guess, with some questions mixed in, and you can comment.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And I'm going to half succeed in not talking about a significant portion of our country that has a view somewhat like that. And I think we as spiritual teachers can be naive. And if Jack was the person that echoed that, I agree with that. I would include therapists. I would include politicians. I would include successful business leaders. The reason why we're in the mess we're in right now, where we have multiple ways to kill ourselves, is because there are illusions like that. Now, that's an extreme illusion, but even a more benign version of that, of believing that you are on the right path and everyone should follow your path and everyone that doesn't follow your path is going to hell. Even that is utterly dangerous. And so we are dealing with things. I happen to be someone who I would say I'm both unpopular to a certain group of people and trusted more by another smaller group of people, which is that if you imagine, let's say, and this is oversimplistic, the 8.5 billion people in the world, there are 1 billion families, and that we decide, you know what, we're wealthy and we're going to leave all of our money or most of our money to our family, that this division between the rich and the poor, which is part of why it's so important to be authentic about money as teachers, who generally speaking are on the poorer end of the spectrum. If we leave it like that, we're going to have 1 billion families all taking care of themselves. And what percentage of those people are taking care of the planet? What percentage of those people are taking care of the poor? Now, I have to be very careful to say to my more advanced clients, and I would only do this one-on-one, which I almost always would qualify with, if I'm projecting on you, tell me right away. But I will at times say something like that, and these people usually would have foundations or they would already be aligned in this way. But when you see the dangers of projecting your own beliefs, that's a very core important thing. And also likewise, to not see how common it is to have, maybe we wouldn't clinically call them all narcissists, but you could call a very large percentage of people, if you looked at it from another point of view, family narcissists. And I would never use that word, but I would say favoritism. 95% of my wealth, my energy, my love, my attention is going to go towards my family, and 2%, 1%, 0% is going to go toward helping the world. So we are in the mess we're in because of that. I have to be very careful because I'm dealing with a lot of people who are more powerful than me, and they would be very sensitive if I'm laying my trip on them. On the other hand, if I don't attempt to try to touch that edge, I don't feel like I'm doing my job. So it's a very delicate thing, and it's very, very important to realize that we have a population. My profession goes on record as saying that we're here to help people adjust to the world. Now, how outdated is that as a profession? Are we not here to bring compassion to the world? Are we not here to help the world survive? Are we not here for that purpose? And are we not a little bit dangerous as spiritual teachers or as therapists to project that onto our students? So holding those opposites on an ongoing basis is quite crucial.
Thanks, Robert. We've two more hands up on this section, and maybe then we could go into the other poll just to personalize it for our own growth.
Exactly.
Great, thanks. Susan, did you change your mind?
Is that Susan or Shelley?
Yeah, Susan was before Shelley.
Oh.
Sorry, Susan, just.
You know, I do use these introspective guides with my teens. And what I find empowering about it, and I just want to speak to this, is it gives them a platform. And I really would like even more around the introspective guides, because when I work with youth, and when they have this way to look at, like, what is it I'm actually feeling, so they can just move it to the other side of finding a way to deal with that. It seems to make the group so much more cohesive. And so I would like you to speak a little bit more about that, because I think it's empowering for me with these kids who now come to groups and just immediately go right there. And I go right along with them, because if I don't, then I'm on the outside of the circle, right? Instead of being on the inside of the circle.
Yeah. Now, Susan happens to be somebody that's been working with hundreds of students for 22 years and is a model of modeling authenticity to her students. And it's something that really is probably, she's my model for that, because she's really not self-conscious, and that has brought her students and it's especially true for youth, to have a model in high school that really is able to bring out a comfort level for people to come forward, because she's modeling that. The introspective guides are only meant as a crucial starting point, because if you're not aware that you have a challenging emotion and you've bought society's general presentation, and I'll riff for a second, how many of you think that we're taught that authenticity and integrity is more important than success? What do you think the percentage is on a gut level? Drive, going to the right school, getting jobs, earning money, saving money, taking care of your family. And so it is so important to have a starting point where you can identify with something human, and then you can see a hope of a direction that you can move, which are the compassionate elements or the needs that you'd want to dwell in. And what are the thoughts that are going to help me? What are the actions that are going to help me? And so she's in the perfect population, where my experience is the guides are more well understood by people that are 11 years old than they are by adults, because they haven't lost track of what they feel. And as we grow up, success, raising a family, going to a good college becomes more important than developing our hearts. And we all as teachers, I believe, are in the best roles to be role models for carrying, yes, a desirable image, but it's not really an image, it's a reality, hopefully. And then when we have those exceptions, we then will guide them towards something specific and not leave them out in the dry. Who wants to admit they feel inadequate if they don't have any direction where they can go? Who wants to admit they feel insecure or they're scared? Not too many people. But if you give them the encouragement of some next steps, and the practice that I'm doing with Awareness That Heals does deal with next steps. So the introspective guides are really meant to be, okay, if I just go silent for a few moments and I look at my life, which of these 75 or any other emotions that are challenging do I deal with that are most make life difficult for me? If you can identify that, and then if you can move from a private awareness, which is a term that I brought out, versus unconscious, because a lot of people are much more aware than they seem, but they hold the awareness of feelings of inadequacy, of fear, of anxiety, of rejection, of abandonment. They hold these feelings privately. If we can encourage them to bring it out, they might not be stuck there for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And that doesn't mean it'll go away. It means they'll be able to have a response where they won't be in quicksand with those emotions. So thank you for bringing that up, Susan.
Just before we go on to Shelley, I'm going to put as a PDF for you guys to download into the chat box. I'll put this introspective guides, which is listing emotions and then listing elements of compassion that are like where to go, as Robert said, like the next step of where to go. So identifying, like, as long, I suppose, as we overindulge on having this public image of having it all together, as long as we overindulge in that, we're suppressing and denying what our emotional body is going through. So the beauty of these introspective guides is that there's a vocabulary for emotions that we mightn't have had access to before, and a vocabulary for aspects of compassion that can give us a place to go to with these emotions. And that's the value, for me anyway, of these introspective guides. We've one more question, Robert, just before you go on to the next poll or wherever you want to take it.
And then before we go to the question, I think we're going to simultaneously give a second poll too, right? That's going to...
There's another poll. Let's do Shelley, right, and then I can pop up the other poll. How about that?
And then you're going to do the third one after that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate this talk. And as someone who has been a mentee and friend and colleague for many years, I know that for me personally, I don't know how many people here are psychologists, but those of you who are know that in graduate school, you're taught to be a blank slate. Like you're not supposed to divulge any of your personal stuff. And it's changing a little bit now, but I know for me personally, when I ask for feedback from clients, that's one of the most common things that they respond is that, you know, when I was going through this thing and you shared that you had gone through something similar, it meant so much to me. And I have one really good example of that. I've struggled with public speaking my whole life, and I've done a lot of in-person public speaking over 20 years, and it still makes me nervous. It makes me nervous talking to 42 people. During COVID, I was invited to speak at an international conference, and you know, it was going to be over 1,000 people, and it was just it was really scaring me. And so I prepared my talk and I did the thing. And toward the end, I shared that I had fear of presenting and that, you know, it was creating a fair amount of anxiety for a couple of days. And I shared my process of what I went through. And I got a lot of really, I got a lot of good feedback from the participants. The number one thing that people shared was that I really appreciated that you shared at the end of the talk how nervous you were in presenting. And it was such a validation, a confirmation of how authenticity, that vulnerability connects you to other people's hearts. And so so I just wanted to share that as a gratitude, actually. But I have one question, and that is, given, let's say you're working with very high functioning people who are psychologically sophisticated and spiritually evolved to some degree, are there any specific areas that you would say you have to avoid?
The main area you have to avoid is students or clients that are basically young, and they really didn't have role models. And so there's a stage where the individual needs to have someone to trust, someone to look up for, someone that's stable, someone that they don't have to worry about their problems. And so it's crucial. And again, it's important that we can discriminate. Is this that type of person? If it is that type of person who really needs someone to look up to and trust, if you are with them for years, they may graduate to a different level. I have found that the 90% of the time where I have a mutual relationship, it's because the client or the group demands it. You know, and sometimes I'll ask a question when I sense it, but almost never will I just launch. And when I do, it's brief. So yeah, you're looking for individuals that are young emotionally, and they need somebody to look up to.
Thank you.
So Jackie, you're going to put up the next poll?
Yeah. There are two polls that are kind of connected, so I'm just going to do one for a minute and then the second one for a minute.
Okay.
Here's the first one. Select situations that personally challenge you. So situations, the role of money in your life, intimacy with friends, sexual intimacy, family of origin, present family, whatever that is, might be your Sangha, climate crisis, humanitarian violence, inequality, none of the above. What situations challenge you?
Yeah. I promise you I'm not psychic. So if you have sexual intimacy or role of money or present family, I'm not going to tell anybody. So, you know,
it's anonymous. It's anonymous too. Don't worry.
You're not going to be asked. You're going to be asked if you have anything more you want to share, but nobody's going to be put in a position. But this is a great chance to just be authentic in just even a subject, because my experience is with teachers and with therapists, teachers of all kinds, leaders of all kinds, that these are areas that are percolating and are kept in our private awareness. And private awareness gives it too much dignity. It's really more private thoughts. And rarely when it's in private awareness is it really worked on as well as it can be if you have a guide, a friend, a teacher that can help.
Robert,
deal
can I
with it.
just jump in there? There's a question about this poll. Not sure what you mean by challenge you. And the question is select situations that personally challenge you.
Okay.
And so David's asking, are you saying like you have trouble talking about it, or these issues push your buttons?
Both. It's a great question. There are issues that you might ruminate in. There are issues that come up in your life that happen throughout your life at various times. There are issues that you very likely, if you talk about it, you talk about it with one person at the most, or maybe you've never talked about them with anybody at all. There's something that pulls your energy down. It robs you of trust and faith and joy and happiness and intimacy, or some of the qualities that are listed in those 75 qualities. So, and it's that list of 75 challenging emotions, those would be my attempt to just make a list, not the list, to help define that.
Another question, can you choose more than one?
I sure hope so. If anybody has one, I'll bow at their feet. This is something that as was said earlier.
I'm going to close this now.
The greatest teachers that I've valued are ones that have been an open book, that have been in a state of general contentment or happiness, but they're really easily able to admit, this is what I'm working on. This is how I'm working on it. This is what is. And, I mentioned earlier, Susan's one of the people that actually does things that are live. If you look around at the large scan of well-known public teachers, public spiritual teachers, and you say, how often do they really share their present or recent past challenges that are difficult and how they've used their teachings? The answer, I believe, is going to be very, very small, or you're living in a different media than I am. My media shows that. They're here largely to share a very important teaching. I'm not devaluing the teaching. It's just isn't taking advantage of the potency of identification and sharing in a timely and discerning way.
So we're sharing right now, Robert, on the screen. And I think you guys can scroll down to see what the results are, because it doesn't all show on one screen. And the biggest one, I think, is the role of money in your life, and it goes down. I think we did something weird with the settings. We gave it a single choice because we were just hoping for like honesty and openness.
Okay.
To see what that felt like. That's where we came from. So that's why we settled on one. It's like, just choose one, and here's the second poll.
And
here's the last one.
Even though you may only choose one, in your inner mind, be very honest about, whatever. There may be five that really get you at various times, or come up only under a certain circumstance. Like insecurity might only come up in a love relationship that was one time in your life, or that's happening now. Likewise with self-rejection, or if you're dealing with situations, I'm really happy to hear role of money is number one, because that was my number one also with the teachers that I talked with. And I think you would do a great service to share with your students that are appropriate to talk about the role of money. Now, from my vantage point, society is backwards. You know, people, or at least half backwards. I have a value for people that are innovative and create jobs and create new inventions. But people that are spiritual teachers, I don't think spiritual teachers should be poor. I think they should be able to live in the same neighborhood as their congregation. I think being able to talk about their ambivalence will evoke empathy. It may increase donations. I think it reinforces a idealization of the teacher and an infantilization of the student. And I think that it's so important to empower the students to say, yeah, we wrestle with this too. Now, I started to say something earlier that I didn't finish about the most common reasons that teachers gave me through the years as to why they didn't share. And the most common reason was, well, that's not the way we were taught in Burma or Thailand or India. We weren't taught that way. So we're just kind of passing on the lineage of our teachers. And my response would be, but you're not them. You know, you're living in the modern world. You're dealing with real issues, and you have a chance to relate to your person or congregation in a way that's going to make them feel like, oh, I trust this person. They're together, but they're also able to relate to me in areas that matter. Now, your role of money or your relationship to money, they may have very different issues of money, but you opening up your area of relationship to money, how many people will talk about, you know, the main area, as I mentioned earlier in my practice, I'm dealing with a group of people that are very successful, but they know they're empty. And so being able to talk about that, pardon the expression, is a gold mine. You know, it's really valuable to be able to realize, gee, I've done everything right, but yet I don't feel good inside. And our whole culture needs to be money literate. It needs to be redefining success. Are we not in the best positions to be able to do that through sharing some of our experience selectively?
So, Robert, I've just put up the emotions that challenge you, and people could just click one, just because I wanted to move through it quickly. And the response is, the highest is anxiety at 18%. Close second is frustration at 15%. Self-rejection, self-criticism at 12% is the next one.
Great.
They're the top three.
Great. Well, obviously a very open group of teachers. I do not think you're a select. I don't think you're a common reflection of spiritual teachers in our world. Either that, or I have a problem, which another problem, I should say.
I think part of it, though, is because people who are drawn to the ASI, myself included, like it's, you know, it's its own organism. We want to be accountable. We know that there's something that wants to change in the culture of spiritual leadership, and we have said, I want to be part of it in some capacity. So we are looking at kind of people who would be a bit more self-aware, I think, you know, because at least we have said we want something different. So we're recognizing something within ourselves that wants something different, you
Yes.
know.
I have no doubt that what you're saying is true. That this organization is set up to exactly inquire into these kind of questions.
Jerry had his hand up. I'm just conscious of the time, Robert, because I want you to talk a little bit about the guides before I put it into the as a PDF in the chat box. Jerry, is your question still alive?
It's been covered. Thank you.
Super. Thank you.
Great. So I think that, and anybody, please do raise your hand, because I'm more interested in what you have to say than what I have to say. So I think viscerally using inquiry, and by inquiry, I mean asking questions from your heart. That would be questions like, am I optimizing my revealing of what I could share that could benefit my students, clients? Is there a format I could set up that would add this extra benefit? And I would say be a little bit, I was going to say grandiose, but I mean confident, that the stakes are really high. You know, I personally believe that we've never been at a time where it's been more obvious that as humanity, we are dominantly unconscious with a lot of exceptions. And that we as teachers can be models of not rejecting, and you mentioned self-rejection as one of the things. We reject an issue or an emotion or a situation, and we need to bring it back on the table and help guide people how to deal with what is true and be a welcoming presence to, I'd love to just meet you, you know, and that includes the part of you that's happy and the part of you that's not happy and the part of you that knows why you're not happy. And the introspective guides really are meant to just be a starting point. And really the next step after that is what I'm talking about right now for you, and I think for the students as well, is supporting inquiring and inquiry itself, which is asking the question, where do I suffer the most? Who could help me the most? Maybe it will lead them to you to come to you. And being able to help the emotional intelligence and the literacy of the inner world, because even in my field, much to my amazement of psychology, I would think it would be psychology 101 to connect feelings and needs, but it's not. It's not. The only person that really largely has dealt with feelings and needs is an international mediator that is nonviolent communication. And that's the closest I've found in all my years of counseling. So I think the teachers are in a great position to help the students selectively pick out a starting point and to take it to heart and to use inquiry. And then inquiry will lead you to a certain kind of wisdom that will guide you. Well, let's see, when I'm anxious, what are the thoughts that are going to help me the most? You know, what are the actions that are going to help me the most? What are the attitudes that are going to help me the most? Who's going to help me develop this the most that I trust that has dealt with this? And so inquiry becomes an important part of the whole process of emotional intelligence. We're not going to be extremely emotionally intelligent if we don't ask ourselves questions. And so it's so important that we pass that along. So in the limited time that we have available, and this is giving you an amazingly abbreviated version of Awareness That Heals, the book, et cetera, and Jack is going to pass on my information at the end that you'll be able to see at some point if you're interested to see more of how that works. But if any of you have any questions, either, you know, I'm considering sharing this, but I'm not sure if it isn't too much. That would be the hard question that I'd ask you if there's anybody that has anything where you're in debate right now about something. And then the easy question would be, is ask any question about anything. And I know we only have a few minutes left, but I'm open to any question about anything. Or if you don't have a question, you just want to make a comment, that's fine too.
The PDF, the extensive list of the introspective guides is there for you to download in the chat box. And we have probably what will be the last question from Connie.
I would just add, hi, Rob.
Hello.
Seen you in so long.
Hello. Hello.
I would just add that, you know, projection is inevitable. And when we disclose, it doesn't necessarily pop the projection. It can, depending on what we disclose. I've been, since retiring as a therapist, I've been teaching a lot online. And some of my favorite moments are when I say, I don't know. Yep. There's this incredible freedom that comes in that moment. And I can feel all the projection. You know, I could have 100 people and I can feel what I'm carrying for them. And there's, when I say I don't know, it's like everything is equalized. And
Absolutely.
it's humanity comes forward.
Yes.
So thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Not knowing is a big area in my work, and I appreciate you for bringing that up. And in terms of projecting, when I go to that gray area that I was talking about earlier, I invariably will say, I know this is a projection. What I don't know is if it's a perception. So I empower you to reject me. Please reject me. And if I do it more than once, fire me. If I don't get it the first time, then I'm projecting on you. But not knowing is a sign of intelligence. Not knowing is part of emotional intelligence. If we're living a superficial life, we're going to know. If we don't know, it means we're going into the unknown and we're exploring, we're in inquiry, we're asking ourselves questions we don't know. So I appreciate that as a spiritual teacher. I appreciate that as doctors. I appreciate that as therapists. I wish it was more true in other professions.
So as we draw this to a close, I want to thank everybody for spending this time, choosing to spend 90 minutes with us, and for exploring this topic of emotional intelligence and how do we take responsibility for our own emotional intelligence, and are we being authentic, how we present to the world. Robert walks his talk about that. Like he does want to know where the rubber hits the road around how he is met. There is no need to vet or audit or be sensitive. You know, he genuinely enjoys increasing his self-awareness and working with it, and it brings a deeper intimacy in a friendship with him, with anybody really. You know, when someone is bolstered in that way with enthusiasm about increasing their self-awareness. You know.
Thank you so much, Jack. And
so thank you for modeling. Thank you for walking your talk. It's very important when it comes to integrity.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And thanks to all of you. I really enjoyed being here and really hope that we can do our parts in this rather crazy point in time in history that I can't help myself but to mention it to you. If I'm projecting on you, fire me.